It was the dead of winter, the kind of night when silence carries the bite of hunger and cold. I was walking home, clutching the last coins in my pocket, when I saw them. 2 children huddled beneath a street lamp, their clothes torn, their lips blue from the frost. They hadn't eaten in days. I hesitated, knowing I barely had enough for myself, but something inside me whispered, "Share what little you have." I took them home, gave them soup and shelter. I never imagined that night would echo back 20 years later when a luxury car stopped at my door. Before I tell you how 2 starving orphans returned to repay a kindness I'd almost forgotten, I want to ask you something. If you had only 1 meal left and 2 children begged you for help, would you share it? Let me know in the comments, and also tell me which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this. My name is Margaret Thompson, and by the time this story begins, I was already 45 years old. A widow for nearly a decade, I had learned to live with quiet endurance. My husband, Thomas, had passed from an illness that drained both his body and our savings. After his death, it was just me, a small cottage on the edge of town, and the sound of a sewing machine that clicked long into the night. I was a seamstress. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep bread on the table and coal in the stove. Most days, I repaired coats and hemmed skirts for wealthier neighbors who rarely looked me in the eye when they paid. They saw me as poor Margaret, the woman who smiled politely but lived alone, always behind her curtain with a lantern burning. Late life was not easy, but I endured it. My cottage was humble, 1 bedroom, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and a draft that whistled under the door in winter. I wore the same wool dress most days, patched so many times it had become a quilt of fabric scraps. Yet despite the simplicity, it was home. Still, people talked. In small towns, they always do. Clara Morgan, my nearest neighbor, was the worst of them. She never missed a chance to remind others of my struggles. "A woman alone," she'd whisper in the marketplace, "living on scraps and charity. It's a pity, really." What she meant, of course, was that she pitied herself less when she mocked me. But I didn't mind. I had grown used to being invisible. That's why, on that bitter winter evening, the sight of those 2 children struck me so deeply. I was returning from Mrs. Hensley's, having delivered a mended coat. The few coins she paid rattled in my pocket, barely enough for flour and a bit of soup bone. My stomach ached with hunger, but I told myself I'd stretch it another day. Then, under the dim glow of a street lamp, I saw them. A boy no older than 9, with a thin jacket that barely clung to his shoulders. Beside him, a girl of maybe 7, her hair tangled, her cheeks red with cold. They were huddled together, their small bodies pressed against each other for warmth. The boy looked up when he heard my steps, his eyes blue, startlingly bright. Even in the darkness met mine. "Please," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion, "do you have any food?" The girl tugged at his sleeve, shaking her head as if afraid to beg, but I could see the truth in her face. Hunger had carved shadows under her eyes, and her lips trembled with each breath. My heart clenched. I thought of the coins in my pocket, of the nearly empty shelf in my kitchen. I thought of Clara, who would surely laugh if she saw me bring strays into my home. And I thought of Thomas, how he had always said kindness was worth more than gold. So I knelt down, my breath fogging in the icy air. "What are your names?" The boy straightened, trying to be brave. "Daniel," he said, then he placed an arm around his sister. "This is Anna. We don't have anywhere to go." I hesitated only a moment longer before I extended my hand. "Come with me." Their small, frozen fingers slipped into mine, and together we walked through the snow toward my cottage. Inside, the warmth was meager, the fire had burned low, and the smell of old wood lingered. But to them, it was shelter. I hurried to light. the stove and set a pot of water boiling. From my shelf I gathered the last of my lentils, a bit of carrot, and the small bone I'd been saving. It wasn't much, but with time and care, it became a thin soup. As it simmered, Anna dozed against my arm, her tiny body so light I could barely feel her weight. Daniel stayed awake, watching me, his expression wary but grateful. When the soup was ready, I set 2 bowls before them. Steam curled into the air, and their eyes widened. They ate slowly at first, as though afraid the food might vanish, then faster, spoon-scraping bowl until every drop was gone. Tears pricked my eyes as I watched. They reminded me of myself years ago, of the nights Thomas and I had gone hungry, so that we could pay rent. But more than that, they reminded me of a truth I had nearly forgotten, that no matter how little you have, there is always enough to share. That night, Daniel and Anna slept on a makeshift bed I made with quilts near the stove. As I listened to their steady breathing, a strange peace filled me. For the first time in years, my cottage didn't feel empty. I didn't know what the morning would bring or how I would explain 2 children under my roof to nosy neighbors. But as I blew out the lantern and lay down to rest, one thought carried me into sleep. Perhaps kindness was not about what we had to give, but about what it gave back to us. The morning after Daniel and Anna first slept in my cottage, I woke to the sound of giggles. It startled me at first. I hadn't heard laughter in my house in so many years. There they were, crouched near the stove, whispering to each other as they traced shapes in the frost on the window. For a moment, I just watched them, my heart warming despite the cold air that still seeped through the walls. "Good morning," I said softly. Daniel jumped to his feet, straightening like a little soldier. Anna clung to his hand, her wide eyes wary. "And we didn't mean to make noise," Daniel stammered. I smiled. "Noise is welcome here. Come, let's see if we can make breakfast." Breakfast was humble, stale bread softened in warm milk, but they ate it as though it were a feast. Anna murmured thank you with each bite, while Daniel insisted on leaving half his portion for me. I pushed it back toward him. "You're growing. Eat it. I've had plenty." Their bond with me grew quickly in those early days. Anna followed me around the cottage, asking endless questions about sewing, buttons, and patterns. Daniel offered to chop wood, though the axe was nearly bigger than he was. I let him carry kindling instead, and he puffed up with pride. At night I told them stories, old folk tales Thomas used to read aloud. Anna would drift off with her head on my lap, while Daniel fought sleep until his eyelids drooped shut. My small, lonely cottage had become something more, a home. But small towns do not forgive quietly. Within a week, Clara noticed. She saw Daniel fetching water from the pump. She saw Anna skipping beside me on the path to the market, and of course she told everyone. At the butcher's, I overheard her voice, sharp and shrill. "She's taken in 2 vagrants, children, off the street, as if she doesn't already live on scraps. Honestly, it's shameful. What decent woman would harbor strays instead of calling the authorities?" I tried to ignore her, but whispers followed me everywhere. Customers who once brought me clothes to men now hesitated, muttering excuses about finding someone else. My work dwindled. The coins in my jar grew fewer by the day. One evening Clara herself came to my door, her arms crossed, her nose lifted high. "Margaret," she said with false sweetness, "word around town is you've taken in 2 children. Orphans, they say. Is it true?" I stood tall, though my heart raced. "Yes, it's true. They were hungry. They needed shelter." Clara's smile thinned. "Hungry strays are dangerous. You'll ruin your reputation. People are already talking." "I'd rather they talk," I replied, "than let children freeze in the street." Her eyes flashed with anger, and she leaned closer. "You'll regret this. Mark my words." And she was right, though not in the way she thought. The very next day, a man from the local authority arrived. Clara had reported me. He knocked firmly on my door, clipboard in hand. Daniel and Anna shrank behind me, their small hands clutching. "My dress, "Mrs. Thompson," the man said, "we've received word that you're housing 2 children without legal guardianship. That is against regulation. They'll need to be placed in the care of the orphanage." Anna whimpered, pressing her face into my skirt. Daniel stepped forward bravely, though his lip trembled. "Please, sir, don't take us. We're not trouble. We just want to stay here." My chest ached at his words. I argued, pleaded even, but the official was firm. Regulations were regulations. That night I held the children close, tears stinging my eyes as they cried themselves to sleep. Daniel whispered, "We'll find you again, Mama Margaret. Someday, when we're older. We promise." I kissed their foreheads, silently praying that their promise would come true. The next morning they were gone, taken by the authorities, leaving my cottage emptier than it had ever been. Clara watched from her porch as the cart rolled by, satisfaction etched into every line of her face. And though I tried to be strong, the silence in my home felt heavier than stone. But deep inside, I held on to Daniel's words. A promise, a thread of hope that perhaps kindness would not vanish into the void. After Daniel and Anna were taken away, my cottage felt unbearably silent. The little laughter that had once filled it lingered only as an echo. The quilts near the stove lay folded, untouched, a painful reminder of the warmth that had been there. Only days before, neighbors whispered as I passed them in town, their gazes full of pity, or worse, judgment. Clara seemed to take special pleasure in my humiliation. "See what happens when you meddle with strays?" she said loudly at the market, her words sharp enough to draw smirks from others. The authorities had to clean up her mess. Work grew scarcer. Families who once trusted me with their garments stopped knocking on my door. Some claimed I was unstable. Others said I was soft in the head for letting vagrants in. Clara's gossip had poisoned my reputation. My jar of coins emptied faster than I could fill it. Yet, despite the hardship, I couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd done. At night, I would sit by the stove and imagine Daniel and Anna safe in their beds, perhaps being fed, perhaps even learning in school. I whispered prayers for them, though I had little faith left for myself. Sometimes I found little tokens they had left behind. Anna's small ribbon, forgotten near the windowsill. Daniel's crude drawing of a house with 3 smiling figures, him, his sister, and me. I kept it folded in the pocket of my apron, and whenever despair threatened to consume me, I touched that paper to remind myself of their promise. "We'll find you again, Mama Margaret, someday." The years passed slowly, marked not by joy but by survival. Each winter grew colder, each summer heavier. My fingers grew stiff from sewing, my eyesight weaker, but I worked as best I could. Some nights I ate only a crust of bread so I could save money for coal. Other nights I went without entirely. Clara, meanwhile, prospered. She married into money, boasted about her fine clothes and well-fed children. She would pass my cottage with a smug smile, wagging her head as if to say, "You chose this life when you chose those children." But she was wrong. I hadn't chosen poverty. It had chosen me long before. What I had chosen was kindness, even if it cost me everything else. Loneliness became my constant companion. I never remarried, never had children of my own. Instead, I poured all the love left in my heart into memories of Daniel and Anna. Their birthdays, dates I had etched into my mind. I lit candles and whispered blessings into the quiet air. I wondered if they remembered me at all, or if the world had swallowed our brief chapter together, leaving me to cling to shadows. And yet despite the emptiness, I never stopped hoping. Hope was stubborn, like a weed that refused to die no matter how many storms beat it down. Sometimes, on still evenings, I would hear the distant hum of cars passing through town and imagine one of them might stop outside my door. I pictured 2 grown faces stepping out, their eyes still the same, calling me by the name they had once given me, Mama Margaret. It was a fantasy, I told myself, A foolish dream for an old woman who had nothing else to cling to. But deep down I knew some promises are too strong to break. And though I couldn't know it then, my waiting was not in vain. Because 20 years later, on another cold evening, a luxury car would indeed stop at my door and change everything. 2 decades passed like pages torn from a book, each one filled with the same handwriting of quiet struggle. I'd grown old, my hair white, my hands knotted from years at the sewing table. The cottage leaned a little more each winter, and the roof begged for repairs I could not afford. Life had slowed to a rhythm of survival: sew, mend, stretch a loaf of bread over 3 days, and pray the firewood would last until spring. My neighbors hardly noticed me anymore. Clara still lived in town, though age had hardened her face, and her voice, once sharp with gossip, now carried the bitterness of someone who had wasted her life chasing appearances. I had resigned myself to solitude. My heart still ached for Daniel and Anna, but after 20 years, I had convinced myself that their promise had been swallowed by time. Perhaps they had grown, moved on, forgotten the frail woman who once gave them soup. I didn't blame them. The world is harsh, and memories of kindness are often buried beneath survival. Then one winter evening, it happened. I was sitting by the stove, sewing a tear in my own coat, when I heard it, the low hum of an engine outside. It wasn't the rickety sound of a farmer's wagon or the groan of an old truck. This was smooth, deep, commanding. I set down my needle and peered through the frost-coated window. My breath caught. A sleek, black luxury car had stopped in front of my cottage. Its polished surface reflected the glow of the street lamp. Neighbors began to emerge from their houses, whispering, craning their necks. Even Clara shuffled out onto her porch, her eyes wide with disbelief. The car door opened, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit. His posture was confident, his presence commanding. Beside him, a woman in an elegant coat followed, her face framed by dark curls. They looked wealthy, powerful, like people from a world far beyond mine. And yet when their eyes met mine through the window, something stirred in my memory. The man smiled, and in that smile I saw him, not the successful gentleman before me, but the little boy who had once sat at my table, spooning lentil soup with trembling hands. "Daniel," I whispered, and the woman, her eyes were the same wide, earnest eyes that had once peered up at me as she clutched her brother's hand. "Anna." I stumbled to the door, my hands shaking as I pulled it open. The cold rushed in, but I didn't feel it. My gaze was fixed on the 2 figures walking toward me. "Do you remember us, Mama Margaret?" Anna's voice trembled with emotion as she said the name I thought I'd never hear again. Tears blurred my vision. "Oh, my darlings. Of course I do." Before I could say more, Daniel wrapped his arms around me, holding me with the strength of a man, but the tenderness of the boy I had once sheltered. Anna joined, and for the first time in decades I felt whole again. Clara gasped from across the street. "Those are the orphans?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the stunned silence of gathered neighbors. "Impossible." Daniel turned, his voice steady but filled with pride. "Not orphans, survivors because of her." He gestured to me. "She saved our lives when no one else would." The crowd murmured, shocked, some ashamed. Clara's face paled as she shrank back into her doorway. Daniel and Anna guided me gently to the car. I hesitated, staring at the gleaming leather seats, the luxury that seemed so foreign to my world of patched dresses and cracked floors. "This is yours, Mama Margaret," Daniel said softly. "Not just the car, but everything we've built. We promised we'd come back for you. Tonight, that promise is fulfilled." Anna took my hands in hers. "You gave us food and shelter when you had almost nothing. Now it's our turn to give you everything." I broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the love I thought I had lost forever. As the car pulled away with me inside, neighbors watched in silence, some with awe, others with guilt. And for the first time in years, I felt not like the poor, lonely seamstress of their gossip, but like a woman whose small act of kindness had changed the course of lives. That night, under the hum of the engine and the warmth of their hands holding mine, I realized the truth. Kindness is never wasted. It may take years, even decades, but it always returns, sometimes in the form of a luxury car waiting at your door. The next morning, Daniel and Anna insisted on taking me into town. I tried to protest, embarrassed by the idea of parading through streets where I had once been whispered about and shamed, but Daniel only smiled. "Mama Margaret, the world needs to know the truth. Not just what you did for us, but what real kindness looks like." When the sleek car rolled into the marketplace, people stopped in their tracks, horses shied, vendors paused mid-call, and neighbors leaned forward to get a better look. The same market stalls where Clara once mocked me now buzzed with hushed anticipation. Daniel stepped out first, tall and confident, helping me carefully onto the cobblestone street. Anna followed, slipping her arm around mine protectively as though shielding me from the weight of every gaze. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that Margaret? With them? Those must be the children she took in all those years ago. They look like royalty." Clara, of course, pushed her way to the front, her face tight with disbelief. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "They were street urchins, strays. She ruined her reputation for them." Daniel turned, his voice calm, but strong enough to carry across the square. "Yes, we were starving orphans, and no one helped us, not one person, except her." He gestured toward me. "When the world turned away, Margaret opened her door. She gave us shelter, food, and love, though she had almost nothing herself." Gasps echoed. Some lowered their heads, ashamed. Others glanced at Clara, whose face flushed red. Anna stepped forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I remember that night as if it were yesterday. Mama Margaret gave us soup, tucked us into quilts by her stove, and whispered stories until we fell asleep. She gave us the courage to survive when we were ready to give up." I felt tears streaming down my cheeks as she spoke. Daniel continued, his tone firm. "Because of her, we grew strong. Because of her, we had hope. And today, everything we've built, our company, our lives, we dedicate to her." The crowd erupted into applause, a sound I never imagined would be for me. Hands clapped, voices cheered, and for once no one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with respect. Clara tried to speak, but her words faltered under the weight of truth. The neighbors who once listened eagerly to her gossip now turned away, unwilling to be part of her bitterness. She shrank back, defeated, her eyes burning with the humiliation of exposure. Anna raised her voice above the applause. "Today, we announce something more. We are building a community center right here in town, in her name. The Margaret Thompson Center for Children. A place where no child will ever have to go hungry or cold again." The applause grew louder, echoing against the walls of the marketplace. My knees weakened, and Anna tightened her arm around me, holding me upright as if she knew my heart was overwhelmed. In that moment, the years of loneliness, of ridicule, of quiet suffering, all of it melted away. My kindness had not been forgotten. It had returned, brighter and stronger than I could ever have dreamed, and Clara, once the voice of scorn, stood silent in the corner, her bitterness drowned out by the sound of gratitude and hope. In the days that followed, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Daniel and Anna refused to let me return to my crumbling cottage. "That house kept you safe all these years," Daniel said gently, "but now it's our turn to keep you safe." They moved me into a warm, sunlit home on the edge of town, filled with books, fresh linens, and a fire that never died down. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to count every coin or stretch a loaf of bread until it grew stale. There was always food on the table, always laughter in the rooms. Every evening, Daniel would stop by after his business meetings, asking me about my day as though I were the most important person in the world. Anna often brought flowers for the windowsills, just as she had once picked wild daisies for my cottage long ago, and slowly the lines of weariness on my heart began to fade. I still stitched from time to time, old habits die hard, but now I sewed quilts for pleasure, not survival. Sometimes, as I worked, I would glance at the mantel where Daniel's childhood drawing still sat in a frame, the three of us smiling in front of a little house, a promise fulfilled. The townspeople, too, had changed their tune. Where once they whispered pity, now they greeted me with warmth. Parents brought their children to the new community center, its sign proudly bearing my name. And every time I saw a child step through its doors, I felt as if the cycle of kindness was beginning anew. Clara passed me once on the street, her face pinched with envy, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. As I sat on the porch of my new home one evening, Daniel and Anna beside me, the golden light of sunset wrapping around us, I realized something. Life had been cruel, yes, but it had also been just. Because in the end, kindness had not only survived, it had triumphed. Years later, as I look back on that cold winter's night, I often wonder what might have happened if I had walked past those two children, if I had let fear or selfishness silence the whisper in my heart. Perhaps Daniel and Anna would not have survived. Perhaps I would have lived out my days in quiet loneliness, never knowing the joy that kindness can bring back. But I did stop. I did open my door. And that single act of compassion became the thread that wove together the rest of my life. The truth I've learned is simple. Kindness never goes unnoticed. It may take years, even decades to return. But when it does, it comes back multiplied, brighter and stronger than you could ever imagine. If you've ever shared a meal, opened your door, or simply offered love when you had little to give, hold onto that memory, because one day, when you least expect it, that kindness may come knocking back at your door, perhaps even in the form of a luxury car waiting outside. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return? Or has someone's kindness ever changed your life in a way you'll never forget? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, so you never miss more true stories of how love, compassion, and hope can change lives forever.